2017 rolls around, and I'm still kind of in my funk, and my family, unbeknownst to me, because we haven't been on normal speaking terms since all of the events of 2015 that I was just sharing with you had come about. And so they used to come and they would stay in our guest room. We have a guest room for anybody, family, friends, stuff coming into town. But they didn't want to stay with us anymore, so they stayed with my sister. And they hadn't even told me that they were in town for my sister, my youngest sister, Syreeta, who was here to do some training. And she was supposed to be going to work for Lerner and Rowe, who, even if you're not in Phoenix, you may have heard of them. They're pretty big. And so she's in town for that, and she begins to prophesy. And again, of course, my family, they didn't listen to me when I prophesied to them. So again, it's like deja vu for them, but at the same time, it's like they're still not listening. And so they're kind of running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out, what do we do? What do we do? Because of course they're trying to do everything except the one thing that they should have been doing, and that was to listen to what was being said. So a process of events took place, and I don't really recall all the details because I was not there. But at one point, my sister had called me, and she kept saying, "Hi, Syreeta. Hi, Syreeta." And I knew why she was saying that when I listened to it later. It was Yahuwah speaking through her, saying, "Hi, Syreeta, wake up. Hi, Syreeta, wake up." Because that's all she said. And so they didn't understand what was going on, but I understood what was going on when I heard about it. And immediately I snapped out of my funk. And my dad had called me because a series of events had transpired where my sister had told my family that she was to sacrifice herself for our family. Not literally, but symbolically. And so at that point she tried to exit the vehicle while my dad was driving, and he grabbed her, and a policeman happened to be right there. And this was all ordered by Yahuwah. It was supposed to happen. And so she was taken into custody, and they locked her up in a psychiatric facility, thinking that she's crazy. And meanwhile, my dad called me, and he told me what she had said, that she needed to sacrifice herself. And when she said that, I knew exactly what was meant by that. And it was kind of ironic because I had just watched, during my funk, I binged watched a bunch of TV shows. And one of the shows that I binged watched that I really loved is called Person of Interest. And in one of the scenes, their computer, that's referred to as God, the computer is supposed to be analyzing all these scenes, the scenarios of something that's supposed to take place, because the chances of it actually succeeding are very few. And in order for this series of events to succeed, one of the characters would have to give themselves up so that the rest of them would be okay. And so that's exactly what happened. And in that episode, the character is playing chess, and he's talking about this move where you sacrifice a piece that is extremely important to you, but you give it up to protect an even more important piece. And for some reason that example stuck with me, and so the moment that my sister said that scene played in my head, and I knew that's exactly what Yahuwah was showing me that he had allowed to occur. He had allowed my sister to go through that to wake me up, because somehow I was that important piece. And so my sister ends up in the hospital, and I'm awake now. I'm like, okay, I'm listening. And so my family's panicking because, you know, they don't understand what's going on. And I'm calm because I can see exactly what's going on. I may not have seen everything that was going on, but I saw enough that I understood what was going on. And I knew that he put her in that position and he would take care of her. So I get to the hospital. My family's freaking out. The doctors and nurses, it felt like deja vu back to my being in the hospital. They were dead set on locking my sister up, even though Yahoo had also allowed something else to occur that would ultimately be used for this example to completely turn around. And that was the fact that this was late April, and my sister was diagnosed with the flu. I guess she had told them that she had the flu when she was admitted, and so they actually ran the test and knew that she had the flu. So we're asking the question, you know, isn't it possible, even though I knew this wasn't the case, I don't know what my family thought, but I knew it wasn't the case, but I knew he was going to use this. And so we were asking, you know, all these doctors, you know, she has the flu. Couldn't this be, you know, what happened with her could be attributed to that? And they're like, yes, but they were determined to lock her up. They were absolutely determined to lock her up. And so they were telling her, you know, you have two choices. You can be committed voluntarily or you can be committed involuntarily. Basically, you can go to the nice psychiatric prison or you can go to the crappy psychiatric prison, depending on whether you're going voluntarily or involuntarily. That was her choice. And so she's telling them, I will go voluntarily, but can I go in Yuma? Because, you know, she was only up here in Phoenix for training, and they weren't having that. They wanted her here. And so they were going to lock her up voluntarily or involuntarily here in Phoenix. And so the day that that all of this came to a head was interesting because I kept trying to get to the hospital at a certain time and everything just kept trying to stop me. And I began to realize very quickly that it was the enemies who were trying to stop me from getting there. For some reason, I needed to get there and get there fast. So I did. And I get there, and she went in for an MRI, even though technically she was already released from the hospital. She was supposed to be being released into whatever psychiatric care. And so I get there, and the doctor comes in to discuss her MRI results. And the doctor tells her, oh, everything's normal and stuff. And at this point, I had gotten there, so my dad stepped out. And so the doctor's telling her, you know, everything looks normal and stuff. And I just kept feeling this strong feeling in my ruach. There was something I needed to say. I had to say something. And so he's like, yeah, everything looks normal. And he's about to walk out. And I said, okay, so, and he said, you know, you have the flu. So normally, you know, it presents this and this and this symptom. And then he listed one. And as soon as I heard it, I knew that's what I needed to jump on. And he said, you know, of course, the symptoms, normal, blah, 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 delirium. And as soon as he finished talking, I said, okay, hold on 1 second. So one of the symptoms is delirium, because if that's a possible symptom of the flu, why are they going to throw her into a psychiatric facility for something that could be attributed to the flu? This is why they compartmentalize everybody. Because this doctor had no idea what was going on. He's not supposed to know. He's just supposed to know this person's going in for an MRI. But he doesn't understand that this person's going in for an MRI and they're about to ship her off to a psychiatric facility for something that could be attributed to the flu. Now, I knew it was not. Yahuwah knew it was not. My sister knew it was not. But they don't know that. And so the doctor stopped and he's thinking about it. And he's like, that's not right. And I could see Yahuwah working on him. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna talk to them about this and speak to them. Because at this point, they were dead set on locking her up. In fact, it was either before this or after this, they would come in and say that they had a court order ordering her to submit for psychiatric testing. So they were giving her no choice in the matter. And they had locked and sealed it in concrete. So there was nothing changing this except for Yahuwah moving, which is exactly what he did through this doctor. So this doctor took up the case and he ran with it, because I half expected him just to, be saying that he would do something about it, but he actually did something about it. And I realized further that he was working immensely, because then the nurse that was in the was in the room with my sister, because she had to be under a 24-hour watch, because they thought she was suicidal and trying to commit suicide or something stupid. And so the nurse who was there, she's like, oh man, we got to get this taken care of, because my daughter, she came in, to the hospital a few weeks ago, and she was having problems with her Crohn's disease, and she happened to mention that she was sad, and they took that as a keyword of her being depressed. And next thing I know, a week later, her boyfriend's calling me on April Fool's Day saying, is this an April Fool's joke? Where's my girlfriend? She hasn't been here for a week. They found out she had been locked up for a week because she told them she was sad. So the nurse was rightfully pissed in our court. And so I just watched as everything just steamrolled to the point that my sister walked out of that hospital completely free. And they were trying to intimidate us because the doctor had gotten on the roll, getting things turned around. And so they sent some police officers in to tell her that she had a court order. And then they sent in this fool of a lawyer, those court-appointed attorneys, which are less than useless, basically. And so she comes in and tells her, oh, you have a court order, you need to obey it. And then finally the doctor comes in and tells her, okay, we've rescinded the court order, you're free. This whole time they all knew she was free. They were here to intimidate and try to rile something up. But I just sat back laughing. And my mom kept looking at me, giving me a stink eye, like, what are you laughing for? I'm like, I'm just laughing because I see what's going on. But Yahuwah used that whole situation to snap me back into motion. And so that started a chain of events where he began speaking to me, and I started seeing another chain of events that he had put together, and which included a friend of mine who I'd become friends with on Facebook, and she lives in Yucca Valley, California. And I just kept feeling this growing feeling that I needed to take off and I needed to go visit her. And so through this crazy other chain of events I won't get into for time's sake, I ended up going to her house, and I drove all night to get there because I would drive really slow and notice things that Yahuwah wanted me to see, including some really important things. And so I got to her house, and he had told me get to her house by sunrise. And so I get to her house, and it's about an hour before sunrise, and I'm sitting there and I'm not sure what to do. And so I'm kind of twiddling my thumbs. I'm going, okay, Father, what am I supposed to do? I keep saying Yahuwah, but I didn't know him as a Yahuwah yet. When he woke me up in 2015, I began calling him Father, because something in me knew that calling him God was not right. I didn't have a name for him, but I called him Father. So I was like, okay, Father, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And he spoke, and he said, yes, you do. You've been through this before. And immediately when he said that, brought to my remembrance was an event that had taken place in the year before. I had gone to rescue a girl who was in a dangerous situation, and Yahuwah sent me to get her out. And so I went with another lady who he was using me to speak to her to try to wake her up. And so she and I went together, and we sat at the house, and it was like midnight. And so all the lights are off, and we don't know what to do. And so we prayed about it, and then suddenly we noticed that the house across the street, there were people outside and lights were on and stuff. And so we got the idea, okay, let's go talk to them. And so we talked to them, and that's when we realized that this girl actually lived in a portion of the house that was not attached to the rest of the house. And so she was actually there, but the rest of the house, the lights were off because they weren't home. And so we went to the portion of the house where she was at, and we were able to get her out of there. And so I'm sitting there, and immediately that example came to mind when he said, you do know what to do. You've been here before. And so immediately when he said that, I had been noticing that the lights were on at the neighbor's house. And so I walked over to the neighbor's house and got their attention and asked them, do you know the lady that lives in some part of the house behind you? And she said, no, but there's a few houses behind the house that the guy owns that he rents out, and she might live in one of those. And so then I asked her, do you mind if I use your phone? Because I ditched my phone at this point. But I happen to have her number written down. And I'm thinking inside, I'm like, she's not going to answer. She's not going to know this number. The lady just said she doesn't know her. But I just felt like I needed to try anyways. So I called her, and amazingly, she picked up. And when I talked to her later, and I'm telling her this whole story, she's going to say, she told me, I'm going to tell you something that's really going to blow your mind. She's like, at the moment that you called, at this specific time of that morning, for 1 hour, one morning, every week, she must answer any call that is placed to her, regardless of the number, whether she knows it or not. And I had just happened to show up at her house, being told to get there at sunrise. Showed up at her house right inside of that hour where she had to answer the phone regardless of who called. I had no way of knowing that, but he knew. And so he told me when to get there, and I did. And we're just kind of sitting blown away by the entire chain of events that had occurred. And at one point, I felt him telling me that there was something that I had put before him that he said, you need to get rid of this. And so I struggled a little bit, but then in the end I said, I don't want to be the person who didn't give this up and missed out on what you have for me, because I couldn't give this up. And so I gave it up, and I got rid of it. As soon as I got rid of it, I'm sitting in my friend's living room, and she had already gone to bed. And I hear my car alarm go off, which is kind of strange because my car alarm had stopped working years ago. And yet my car alarm is going off. And at that point I knew it was him because my car is locked, so nobody's in my car. And so I'm like, okay, yes, Father. And this is what he said. Because I had asked him, when he told me to give up those things, he said, when you give them up, I will give you your next step. And so the car alarm had actually woke me up. I had dozed off, and it woke me up. And when it woke me up, he told me, I need you to go back to Phoenix. He said, there is a church in Scottsdale that I'm sending you to, and they believe as you do. So I said, okay, I'm going back to Phoenix. Going to Scottsdale, looking for a church. Okay, so, and this is May of 2017 when all of this was transpiring. During this same trip, I had told my friend, and I had told somebody at one of the stores I had stopped at on the way here, I had told him, I feel like I need to take a trip up the coast. And then after I said it, I was like, why do I keep saying that? It was bizarre. I never said anything like that before. It was something I dreamed of doing, but never actually planned on doing. and never had actually told anybody aloud that I was going to do. And I didn't even know why it came to mind, except it was just the Ruach speaking. And so I said it twice, and then after the second time I was like, okay, maybe I really need to pay attention to this. And so I headed out from my friend's house, and I got, my tank was empty. My gas tank was completely empty. And I actually got 100 miles down the road before my car finally just quit. And this was not the first time this had happened. When I left my house after the confrontation with my parents, the same thing was happening. My car never ran out of gas then. This time my car did, but I had gotten like 100 miles down the road with no gas. Until he stopped me at the place that he wanted me to stop because he wanted me to see something there. Another long story. And so I eventually, my husband shows up with the gas tank. And when I saw him, I looked at him, and I think I was telling him some of the things that happened. And I looked at him and I said, if you continue to cheat on Father with me, I will continue to cheat on you with him. And I told him, this is what you need to do. You need to get alone with him, and you need to take some time out and start spending time with him and getting to know him. He wants to know you. And so we got back to Phoenix, and I actually did drive to Scottsdale looking for this church, and I never found anything. And so at that point, I kind of forgot about that. I journaled it when I got home. I wrote down everything that he reminded me of. He would bring these things back to my remembrance, and amazingly, I would be able to write out all of these things, the important things that happened that I needed to make a note of. And so at that point, my husband didn't take heed to that. But fast forward a year, and one of the things that I had talked about back in 2015 is I had talked about the plagues of Egypt coming upon us if we didn't listen to what the Father was saying. And so he's trying to get my husband's attention. And so in the meantime, 2018 rolls around, and I began to pray and ask the Father to show me what is going on in this world. What systems are operating, and what do things accurately look like? Not what they want us to see, but what is it that we really need to see? And who is at the top of this system of the world? Because I was beginning to piece together that, things were not as random as people claimed them to be. And so he began to paint a picture for me, long story short, and this is how I was led to the Father's name. And so I was doing some research, and there was a verse that kept coming to mind, and it was either the verse that many are called, few are chosen. It was either that one or another one. And I had gone to look for them. The one that says, not everyone that says to me, Master, Master, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father. And so I was looking for one of those two verses, and I went to do a search for it on the internet. And it pulled up a search result that immediately caught my eye because of the description that was with it. And I was like, that doesn't sound like the normal rhetoric of, church pastors and whatnot. And so I clicked on it. And when I did, I ended up learning all about the role of the Catholic Church in the events of today and how it applies to Revelations. But it was an angle where they were trying to make it into something that it was not, to cover up something that should be at the forefront of what we're seeing. But I didn't know that at the time. So I'm just reading about that. And one of the sites that I ended up on, about 3 sites in, I stumbled across an article that was talking about the Father's name. And so I clicked on it. And I read it, and it was saying that his name is Yahuwah. And when I read that, I immediately perked up. It was like it was speaking to me. I knew. And so I asked him, I said, Father, is this your name? And he said, yes, that's my name, and that's how it's pronounced, but that's not how it's spelled. And they were spelling it Yahuah. So I continued doing the reading that I was doing. I finished reading that article, went on to some other ones, and then I wound up through searching the information that I was looking at. I ended up on another page called World's Last Chance. And there they were also talking about the Father's name, but they spelled it Yahuwah. And I said, and as soon as I read that, he said, that's how you spell my name. And so I was like, wow, that's incredible. And so from that point on, I was calling him Yahuwah because I knew he had shown me my name. And the moment he showed me that, he reminded me of what I had told my mom when I told her, what is my name? Tell me what my name is. Because that was one of the things he was going to reveal to me. And so after I found the Father's name, the same article addressed the Son's name, which is pronounced correctly, but again was spelled wrong. And so, but I didn't know that at the time. And so a few months later, we're starting to experience in our house this weird phenomenon where we had like these swarms of fruit flies. We'd never had that before. We'd had like a small version of it in 2015, which I thought was interesting because now it was repeating itself. And it was like this huge swarm that we could not get rid of no matter what we did. And then on top of that, we were starting to have swarms of crickets taking over our house. And on top of that, we were also having other bugs that were taking over our house to the point that it was driving me nuts. And one of the things that I had said in 2015 that I didn't understand until then is I said, I don't like bugs. And it was the Ruach speaking through me, but he was also showing me something that would speak to me when I saw all these plagues of bugs, and I'm going, I can't stand this. And during this time, I was telling my husband, you need to figure out what's going on here, because he had stumbled on some of the recordings of me prophesying back in 2015 that I had told him to record, and he had recorded, and he had saved them and forgotten them. And I told him, you need to revisit the things that were said to you and figure out what is going on. And so when I said that, he remembered the recordings that he had made of me prophesying. He went back and watched them, and when he did, it triggered a memory for him, and he remembered that when I left the house after the confrontation, the first thing he started doing was picking up the money that I had thrown on the floor, because I was making a demonstration of the thing that was hanging him up, his stronghold, which is money. And so he was picking the money up. That was the first thing he remembered doing when I left. And Yahuwah was beginning to speak to him and showing him that he needed to deal with this. And at that point, he also remembered what I had said the previous year when I told him, that if you don't stop cheating on him with me, I won't stop cheating on you with him. And so I told him, you need to get alone with him and let him speak to you. So all these plagues are happening, and I kid you not, the moment my husband decided he was going to go away and spend some time with Yahuwah, the bugs disappeared and did not return. They were gone. And this was the middle of summer. This was like late July. So there's no reason for them to disappear. It's bug season, They were gone. They did not return the rest of the year. And so the night he went on his excursion, Yahuwah did for him something that he had constantly done for me. And the night he left to spend some time with Yahuwah, this huge thunderstorm rolled in right around the time he left. And the thunder was so loud, it not only shook our house, but I had to cover my ears. It was that loud. It was an incredible night, and I knew it was for him. And then he would further confirm this the following year, because the same thing would happen. And I didn't know this was happening, but bugs were starting to show up in our house again. And I looked at my husband and I said, "What is wrong? Something's off." Because I don't like bugs, so I noticed their patterns. And they don't usually show up in our house like this. And they're back again. And he was hemming and hawing. And then I was on him so much, he finally stormed out the door. And the reason I had gotten mad was because there was a cricket in our house that was chirping. And this doesn't ever happen. They don't come in our house and chirp. They usually chirp outside. This one was in our house and it was chirping, and I had sent Jeff to go find it and dispatch it, and he couldn't find it, and it was chirping for hours. And finally I said, "What is going on? You need to figure out what is going on. Go tell him." When he left, the bugs stopped. I waited for 2 hours. I knew it wasn't going to start back up, and it didn't, but I waited for 2 hours. It never started back up. And about 2 hours later, I finally look up at the wall, and it's right up on the wall. And I'd sent my husband to go find it. He couldn't find it because he was supposed to leave. And when he got back, that's when he told me that he knew that the cricket had probably stopped. And he also knew that it was happening because that was the night he was supposed to go meet with Yahuwah, because he set it up that he would go every month to meet with him, and that was the night he was supposed to go, and he was gonna bail on that, and it was like the Jonah experience. And so when that repeated, I was like, I knew that he was showing Jeff that, because the first time he showed it to me and I understood, but Jeff didn't get it and he thought it was silly. But the second time that happened, he realized that was real. And not only was it the bugs showing up again, it was also the storm showed up again that night when he left, just like the first time. So so after he started doing his going away with Yahuwah the first time, which was in 2018, that's when Yahuwah began speaking to my husband, and he felt like he started feeling like we needed to take a trip to see a friend of his in San Angelo. And around this time, we were also trying to figure out getting his vehicle fixed. And so and that goes back to 2016. So in 2016, I had written in my journal that I had a dream, and I dreamed that the transmission went out in a car, and I thought it was my husband's. I wrote down in my journal, I think it was Jeff's. The following year, his transmission went out. By then, I had forgotten about the dream. I wrote it down, but forgot about it. The year later, he started kind of thinking that he wanted to sell the vehicle. This was right before he started, spending time with Yahuwah. And he was talking about selling his vehicle, and I had known that Yahuwah had shown me that we weren't supposed to sell that vehicle. We were supposed to fix it. But I didn't say anything because I was, Yahuwah had me speaking a lot of things already to my husband, and so it was one of those things I didn't want to ride him on, so I left that one. And so and then Yahuwah began to speak to him, and when he began spending the time with Yahuwah, he began to realize that we needed to get that vehicle fixed, his vehicle. And so around that time, Yahuwah told me, go back in your journal and read. There's some things you need to see. And when I went back and read it, that's when I read about the dream I had in 2016 where his transmission went out. And then it's just hit me like a ton of bricks, like, oh my word, I did dream that. And I wrote it down, and his transmission went out the following year. And then the following year, when he started listening to Yahuwah, that's when Yahuwah opened his eyes and he saw this place that he had driven by every day for work, because it's right on his way to and from work. He had driven by it but never seen it until Yahuwah opened his eyes and he saw it. And one of the reasons he hadn't fixed his car was because it's an older Honda, much older Honda, and so the parts were getting harder and harder to come by. And he had called places, and they're like, no, we don't have the parts. No, we don't have the parts. Well, he drives by this place, and this guy's advertising that he has the parts, and he does repairs on older Hondas and Nissans, which are both the cars we have. So we knew Yahuwah was setting that up. So he takes his car into this guy, and this guy is telling him that he grew up in Texas. And my husband's like, really? Well, I grew up in San Angelo. And the guy's like, well, I grew up here, but I used to fish in San Angelo. And so they're talking back and forth. And unbeknownst to my husband, I took off on a trip that I felt like Yahuwah wanted me to go on. And one of the streets I passed was San Angelo Street, which I never would have seen. Except I wanted to go back to this park that we had gone to in 2013. And so when I found it, I went there, and driving by, I saw that street. And I took a picture of it. And when my husband told me that, I was like, you're not going to believe it. And that's when we knew he was showing us something that we needed to do. And so, long story short, we went on this trip. And Yahuwah wanted us to be there for a specific amount of time. And at first, we weren't exactly getting the message. I say we, but I got the message a little sooner. So that morning, my husband's alarm starts going off. And again, it's like my car was the year before. It was like, okay, he's trying to get our attention about something, because that doesn't normally happen. And so I was saying this, but my husband wasn't getting it. And so they're trying to figure out the alarm. And the more they try to figure out, the more they couldn't. And that's when I knew this is Yahuwah. And so it took hours, and they finally figured it out. It was actually a simple, silly thing. And when they figured it out, my husband's like, okay, we're getting on the road. And I'm going, he's not getting this. And so we're getting ready to get on the road, and the family just keeps trying to get us to stay. And I know we're supposed to stay, and I'm like, but nope. So then we go out, and the husband tells my husband that our tire is a little low, and we need to, fill it up. And I'm thinking, he's trying to tell us we're supposed to stay. And so then we ended up having to take the car in to get the tires filled. And at that point, the guy was nice enough he did it for free, but he tells us, you guys need new shoes. And he was referring to our tires. And at that moment, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I was like, we are going to get a flat, because he is trying to keep us here. And sure enough, we get outside of the city. We're about 30 miles out of the city, and the tire goes flat. And it was the kind of blowout that we should have gotten in an accident, but we didn't. He was protecting us. He was trying to get our attention, and he was protecting us. So not 10 minutes after we pulled over, I don't even think it was 5 minutes after we pulled over, because I was still on the phone with AAA, which I had almost canceled. And Yahuwah had told us during remember the coastal road trip I told you I felt I needed to take? Well, we took that a month later. During that trip, I felt like we needed to get AAA, so I got it. But that was like over a year and a half prior. And so when it came around to re-enroll, I was like, well, we haven't used it. What do we need it for? And I would have canceled it, except that they had already billed us for it. And so we were kind of stuck keeping it. And in that moment, we were very glad that we still had it, and realized that he had told me to get that. And so I was on the phone with AAA when these guys pull over, nice guys, and they're big into fishing, which we had just started getting into, which I thought was hilarious, just the coincidences. And so they're talking about fishing, so my husband goes to look the guy up, and then they get us fixed and on the road. We were probably on the side of the road for 10 minutes. That was it. We get back on the road, and we're not on the road for 5 more minutes when the spare goes out. At this point, I'm no longer laughing. Jeff's no longer laughing. I'm not mad. I'm not frustrated. I know what's going on, but I'm just like... And then to make sure that we did not get the idea of getting towed back to town, fix the tires, and then get back on the road, there was actually a fatality that occurred between us and town. So then I get back on the phone with AAA, and they're telling us about this accident, and they're telling us we can't get a tow truck to you. So we're stuck. And so at this point, I'm telling my husband all of this because he still wasn't getting it. And so I'm like, honey, this is why this is happening. We were supposed to stay. And so we did end up staying. Well, it turns out one of the reasons that we were supposed to be there and have a blowout was because the guys who stopped, my husband looked up their profile because they were big fishermen and they love fishing all over. In fact, they have their own YouTube channel. And we had just started fishing earlier that summer, something that I felt that Yahuwah wanted us to do. And just the coincidence of that was clicking. And so he goes to look them up, and he finds out that he sends me the profile, and I look at it, and the first thing I notice is this huge old Confederate flag across the guy's profile. I'm like, really? I was kind of miffed, but at the same time I was kind of laughing because just before this trip I'd had a conversation with my friend Jen, and she had been stationed in South Carolina. She didn't understand why, but then Yahuwah was beginning to open her eyes because I was able to help lead her into the truth, and so she was beginning to see some of the reasons why she was there in the South, and one of it had to do with figuring out some truths about the South, which we'd eventually figure out. But at that time she was telling me this, and she was asking me, have you ever looked into the history of the South? And I was like, nope. I was like, as far as we know, they enslaved my people, so I'm not exactly gunning for digging into their history books, And so then when he sent that guy to, help us out, it was just like he was showing me, I need you to get over this because there's something I need you to see. And so when we got home from that trip, and there was actually a number of reasons why he wanted us to stay there, but when we got back, I started looking into some things, about the South. And I don't remember how I came across it, but I came across this one article, and it was kind of talking about one of the concepts that I hadn't really considered a whole lot, but I would start to consider when I read the article. And it was talking about how not everybody on this earth is called by Yahuwah. And it kind of went back to that verse I was sharing, where many are called, few are chosen. It doesn't say everybody's called, it says many are called. But then it says of the many that are called, only few are chosen. And that's what I was beginning to realize was the case with my family. They're called, but they may very well not be chosen. And I had to live with that fact that Yahuwah had called me out, and he had chosen me, but he may not have chosen my family. And so when I realized that, I looked back to see who wrote this amazing article that was kind of helping to open my eyes, and lo and behold, it just happens to be on a Christian Identity Church page. For those of you who don't know who Christian Identity is, they're the white supremacists who believe that, the Caucasian people are the chosen people. They believe that they are the people of the Bible. And so I laughed, and I was like, okay, I know you're reminding me. You put some of your truths in some of the most unlikeliest of places. So I was reading some more, and I was getting hot under the collar just reading, their theology about, how they view the Negro people. And this one article just had me so hot, I just had to put it down, and I was like, Yahoo, I can't read it anymore. I don't know if you want me to read this or not, but I can't read this anymore. I was just so mad, because they were describing their opinion of the Negro people as less than human and blah, blah, blah. And how they are on top because they are the chosen people, so they were meant to enslave the Negroes. The Negroes were meant to be, their slaves because they are the chosen ones. And so I stopped reading, and I just told Yahoo, I said, you know my heart. You know that I am chasing after truth. So if this is the truth, as unlikely as it seems, if this is the truth and you tell me this is the truth, I will walk away and say, okay, that's the truth, that's that. And I'm good with that because it's the truth. But I want to know, is it the truth? And he said, no, it's not the truth. He said, it's upside down. And when he told me that, I was like, what? Because I knew exactly what he was telling me. Something I had never even in my wildest dreams considered. That he was telling me that my people, the Negro people, are the Hebrews, the people of the Bible. And I couldn't accept that in the moment. I was like, I want the truth, but then I was just like, okay, I'm not sure I'm ready to accept that. Because we had been so conditioned, I personally had been so conditioned, so brainwashed, that we constantly are supposed to look up to the Caucasians and want to be like them. And we're supposed to burn our scalp out, for Christ's sakes, to, press our hair and make it straight so we can look like the Caucasian people, because we've been so indoctrinated. And it was just like, and a number of things were starting to make sense when he said that. Because when I began my experience into waking up, he had told me, stop pressing your hair, stop wearing wigs, stop wearing extensions, stop wearing all this stuff, stop covering your hair up, be proud of who you are. And so I did, and I got to the point where I was comfortable with it, but I didn't understand what it meant until he told me that. And I still couldn't. I was just like, And so I actually let it go. I didn't even dig into it. And then I felt like I needed to look something up a few weeks later. And so I get online to look something up, and I come across this comment by this guy. Excuse me. And he's talking about how this woman, who everybody says is white, but clearly her features are, she has some Negro in her. And he was saying how she is part Negro, and that she was writing to, she was originally writing to the Hebrews in captivity, and then her writings were hijacked, and they were messed up, kind of like another book we know. They were messed up and used to start another denomination, but that her readings were hijacked, which I was able to verify by getting the original copy of one of her original books and comparing it to the book that they're claiming is her writings, and they're two different writings. And so he was saying that her original writings were to the Hebrews in captivity, the Negroes who are in captivity. And when he said that, I was just like, he could have picked my jaw off the floor. It was just how Yahoo kept leading me to this stuff, because I wouldn't go looking for this stuff. I would have been looking for something totally what I thought was unrelated, like a Bible verse, and then I find out, his name and about the Catholic Church, and then I go, looking for information about some lady in her writings, and that's when I find out, that this guy's also talking about how the Negroes are actually the Hebrews in captivity. And so when I began that started my point of actually beginning to dig into and find out the truth about what is going on. Okay, this is the last portion. And I wanted to say the most powerful, but the truth is that all of it, from my experience, has been really powerful. Seeing how Yahuwah works, seeing how he confirms his word, seeing how the Christian church, which I come out of, was not according to his word. And that was one of the reasons that I knew we had to get out of there. And one of the things that I had actually said in prophetically back in 2015 was I had said that my pastor was the Antichrist. And that's actually backed up in scripture, because it says that the spirit of the Antichrist, many Antichrists have gone out into the world. And that these so-called Protestant churches, which they're not really protesting much when it comes to the Catholic Church, and when you look at both of them, you realize that there's more similarities than there are differences. And even they themselves say that. You hear Rick Warren and some of these other guys, and they'll all say the same thing. Well, we've got more similarities than differences. And the truth is, that's actually the truth. Because when you get down to the real doctrine, they all believe the same things. They just pretend like there's these differences, but the truth is, it's all connected, just as Yahoo had shown me. So anyways, when he began to reveal to me who the Negroes truly are, this was around the end of 2018, going into 2019. So I did a lot of study into that, and it was just like facts upon facts upon facts, began to verify that this is the truth. And if you look into it, one of the comparisons that's constantly made in the Bible is, it's said that the Israelites were constantly erroneously compared as Egyptians, and that's actually in 3 different passages that I know of. There may be more. Joseph's company, when he went to bury his father, that company was mistaken for Egyptians. Moses, when he helped the Midianite's daughter, when they went and told their father what happened, they mistook him for an Egyptian and said, an Egyptian came and helped us. And Paul, when he was imprisoned, right around the time that he knew that, he was going to his death, the Roman soldier asked him, aren't you that Egyptian who did this? And so they were constantly compared to Egyptians. Well, one of the wonderful things that has happened in this world is that the Egyptians are constantly idolized and worshipped all over the world. And so their heritage and their artifacts have been preserved. And so when you look at how the Egyptians paint themselves, they paint themselves as persons of color. And if you look in the Zondervan Bible Dictionary, it talks about how the sons of the descendants of Ham include the Egyptians. But it also specifies that from Ham, the Negroes did not come. So where are the Negroes from? And so the Egyptians were constantly compared as, Israelites were constantly mistaken for Egyptians. So I don't think I've ever seen a Caucasian person who passes for an African, because that's basically what the Bible's saying. Egyptians, they're part of Africa, and they don't pass for white people. So, and that's just one example. There's a lot of them out there. And I did a lot of digging, and I came to realize that this is indeed the truth, especially when you go back to Deuteronomy 28, where it talks about that when his children, the children of Israel, did not heed Yahuwah's commands, they would be taken into Egypt again, this time via ships. And Egypt's only about a day's walk from Israel, so there's no point in taking a ship from Israel to Egypt. So it's talking about another land. And when you get into some of the other verses, it clarifies what that land is. It's a land beyond the waters of Ethiopia, which is one word that was used to refer to Africa back in those days. And beyond those waters is talking about a large body of water, possibly an ocean. And it also talks about in another passage how the people who are, I believe it says, swift as an eagle, are the ones who would take those people captive. And last time I checked, America likes to represent itself with the bald eagle. So once I had all this enormous number of facts supporting this theory, and the only theories that support the others who claim the right to, or the personage of Israel, being that one of them happens to live there but haven't been there very long and did some very shady things to take control of that land, and that Yahuwah promised that that land would have peace when the real people took it back, and there's no peace there. So, and then the other group their only claim really is a few shady verses that have some interesting interpretations when you really go to the source, the Hebrew source of what those passages say. And the other thing is they claim that the reason that they are blessed and therefore must be God's people is that they make a lot of money and they're on top politically. But when we go back to the Bible, we see that that does not legitimize the claim of his people to their heritage, because he said if they disobeyed him, which the scriptures make it abundantly clear that his people did over and over and over again, that if they did not obey him, that they would be under and not over. And so there's one group of people that stands out as fulfilling all of those and actually being the people of that Bible, meaning that that book is their history book. And so when I realized this, I realized the truth of what he had told me. And so that was going into this year, actually. And so I was wrapping up some other studies around that time, after I finished compiling all of this information and realizing, as a lawyer, even a bad lawyer could make a good case for who the real people are. And so at that point I was like, yeah, this is the truth. I knew that to be the truth. And so around that time I was wrapping up that study, and I got into researching another piece of information. And once I wrapped that up, I had my friend Jen, she kept telling me how she was totally addicted to Pinterest. And so she had gotten on Pinterest and she found some interesting pens, and she started sending them to me. And so when she did, I was like, I need to get back on Pinterest. Because I used to have been on there a lot, frequently actually, and but I had let it go, and so I felt like I needed to get back on there. So I got on there and I found a few pens that I actually saved to a folder because I wanted to look up the information and see if it's correct or not. And one of them was a pen dealing with Father's Day. And so I went to search for, a quote from the book to see if I could find what book it was, because it didn't say what book it was. And so when I went to look for it, one of the links that came up was something that caught my eye. And so I clicked on it. And when I did, it took me to the site, and I immediately knew it was the truth, because it was the truth that Yahuwah had been revealing to me. And so it was, it was ringing with my ruach, like, this is the truth. Whoa. And so then I kept reading, because when I know I found some truth, I keep digging to see what else they have. And before I had gotten on this site, I had made a list of a few things that I was asking Yahuwah to show me. What the information is about. Another pen I had found was one that talked about how one of the Egyptian gods is Amun Ra, and that when we're saying Amen, or when we're saying amen or amen at the end of prayers, we're actually addressing this Egyptian god. And I'm like, ooh, I need to find out if this is the truth or not. And so that was kind of one of the things on my little list of things I wanted to know, along with something else that had been mentioned to me about pharmacy being coming from the root of pharmakeia, and I wanted to look into that. But nowhere in any of the sites that I had read could I remember any of them actually addressing places where we could go and research this information and look it up. And so I wind up on the site, and I immediately know it's truth. And so I keep reading article after article after article, and then I found the answer that I was looking for about Amun-Ra. And then I keep reading, and I'm reading, and before long I had read just about every page on this website. And the more I kept reading, the more I was thrilled and floored and shocked to discover that all of this stuff that Yahoo had been showing me was all that the things that I knew were truth that he had shown me, that I knew the truth of, I was finding on the site constantly, again and again and again and again, because I realized in that moment he had shown me a lot, and that there wasn't a lot that I didn't already know that was on this site, other than the things that I had asked him to show me, which now he was showing me through this site. And so I was just floored reading it, and I was just stunned, and I was very admiring at the work that somebody had taken and done on this site, because they had dug into a lot of truth. And so when I realized that, I started feeling like I need to go to their Facebook page and see, what else they have on their Facebook page. Because one thing I had learned is that a number of sites that I had gotten on that didn't immediately show me what their intentions are, or what the real truth that they believe is, if it wasn't indicated on their site, I could usually find it on their Facebook page. And so I had outed a few of them by doing this. And so I jumped on their Facebook page, and again, it was just, the same truth, and just the same over and over. And so I scrolled down, and I just kept scrolling, looking for posts of things I hadn't already read on the website. And I went way deep on their website, and I got back to a post from, I guess it was from 2018. And I stopped short when I read it. And it was like my heart almost stopped. And because the post said that they were gearing up for a assembly in Scottsdale. I was floored when I saw that. And the reason I was just absolutely floored is because I had been, out on my own in the wilderness for so long that I had gotten used to that feeling, and just, it being, me and him. And then when my friend came into the truth, it was me, my friend, and him in the truth. And then my husband, would wake up. And so then it was the four of us at the most. But that was the most I had ever found, locally. And here I am in Phoenix, and they're talking about a meeting in Scottsdale, and I just got so excited. I was like, no way. And I started freaking out, and then I stopped and I said, okay, hold on. Just take a breath. Yahuwah, what do you want me to do? Because that's what I always try to ask. What do you want me to do? Maybe you don't want me to contact him. Maybe, this isn't, I don't know. What do you want me to do? And as soon as I asked him, immediately came back to my remembrance what he had told me 2 years prior about finding a church in Scottsdale. And as soon as I realized that, I knew he was sending me to them, because he had told me, I'm sending you to them. There's a church in Scottsdale, and I'm sending you to them, and they believe you as you do. The kicker when he told me that, I didn't know his name. I didn't know his son's name. I didn't know the shape of creation. I didn't know any of this stuff. I now knew it as I was coming onto their site. But when he told me this, I didn't know that. So I didn't even know that what he was telling me was that I would come to believe all this stuff, which would line up with the things that they believe. And that's not all. So I got excited and I get on and I messaged them, and they immediately messaged me back, which floored me because, good luck with some of these websites, trying to message them and hoping for a message back, and you might get one months later if they answer at all. And so I was floored by that, and then they're like, hey, let's jump on a call. You're local, we're local, let's jump on a call. And I'm like, dang. And so we get on a call and they're like, hey, tell us your story. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where do I start? And so I started at some point of all this that I'm sharing with you, and shared most of it with you. Some of it may be a surprise to them because we didn't have enough time to go into all of this. And so I'm sharing my story, and I'm telling them the story of how in May 2017 is when Yahuwah showed me that I would find a church in Scottsdale, and they believe as I do. And then, so Javon and Kelly, this is Warriors of the Ruach that I'm talking about. And Javon and Kelly are kind of looking at each other, and they're doing the math. And they realize that the same month, or right around the same month that Yahuwah was telling me that, was also the same month that they were actually launching Warriors of the Ruach. So I think Kelly said something about at that point is when she got chills. And I was just in awe of who Yahuwah is. And of course, he's the Elohim of, the heavens and the earth that he created. Of course, he knows to weave all these tapestries together into this beautiful masterpiece. But it was mind-blowing to see how he was working. And that, of course, he wasn't even done. And so when I found them and I'm talking to them, they're telling me, how they are into music and making music and putting it out there and not charging for it, putting it out there free of charge. And as they're telling me this, inside, it was like, I was wondering, I was kind of asking Yahuwah, can this be? Because here I was, I had set music aside for 2 years. And then when I went back to that church for one last time, because he had called me to go back and to give them one last ultimatum. And so during that time, and incredibly, the Friday that I went back to that church was 9/11. So he was trying to get their attention. And so I was involved in music for that period. But then at the end of that, in 2016, I stopped. And so I had continued to do a little bit of writing and stuff like that. But other than that, I stopped singing. I stopped doing any of that. And what I told him was, and I felt like what he was telling me he wanted me to do, was to set this aside and focus on him. And that at the end of that, whenever it was time, he would let me know. And so as they're telling me about all this music that they're putting out, I'm thinking, what are the odds that I would connect not just with an assembly of believers, but assembly of believers that, is focusing on music. And I just kind of was asking Yahuwah, like, can it be? Is this the time? And so I was talking to one of the other Kuths, and I felt like I needed to use this example, and he used a hilarious set of circumstances to throw us together to have this conversation, and we realized it at the end. And I mentioned to this Akuth that that I used to be involved in church, and then I was, people would come to me, right before service to start with stuff, and I would just be like, I'm trying to focus on one. And I hated that example because I'm like, that's my example from back in Babylon. But for some reason, I felt like I needed to share that. And when I did, she came back to it and she said, so, you do music, huh? And I was like, oh, here we go. And so, but it didn't exactly take that first time. And so I was like, okay, well, if it's going to take, it's supposed to happen, you're going to make it happen. I'm not going to push it. And so she kept bringing it up on calls. And then I think it was the second call that one of the other ox kind of jumped on it. And he was like, well, do you have a demo or something? And I'm like, no. All my stuff is, the only stuff I ever had was from back in Babylon. And so I got off the call, and I think it was the next day, it just came back to my ruach, and I just felt like I should put something together. And I didn't know how that was going to happen because I hadn't done music in years. But Yahoo just dropped it all in my ruach, and I figured it out. And I was asking him, like, what song should I use? And I felt him impress this song that he had given me, and I knew he had given it to me, but he had given it to me probably around the time that all this stuff was being told to me. And I started getting this melody to a song. And then I had written a few lyrics, barely anything. I had like the first half of a verse and a chorus. That was it. But at the same time, when he gave it to me, he kept giving me all these parts, all these different parts. There was like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There was like 6 different parts that I kept hearing, and I would carry around this little recorder that I bought, and I would record the parts. And before I knew it, I knew I had the entire melody of a lengthy song, but I had no lyrics except for that half of a verse and a chorus. And I felt him telling me, use that one. And I was like, but it's not finished. And I kid you not, it was like he said, so? So I'm like, okay, I will use it. That's what you want me to do. And so I threw it together. Silly little dink song with just a half a verse and a chorus, and I sent it to my brother in the truth, and he listened to it and he was like, wow. But that wasn't the biggest wow. The moment I sent it to him, within 24 hours I finished writing the entire song. I had lyrics for each of those 6 different parts that Yahuwah had given to me a year or 2 before. And I had finished the song. And so I felt like I needed to put it together. He'd given it to me and I needed to use it. So I threw it together. I figured it out, jumped on GarageBand because I'm on a MacBook and that comes with MacBook. So I jump on GarageBand and I recorded it real quick, a rough copy. I haven't sang in 3 years. My voice was rusty. But I felt like it was something he was telling me, it's time. And so I put it together and I gave it to the same brother. And I wake up the next morning and I've got this long old message. He's telling me all about the song. He was blown away. And so then he tells me, I need to send this to Siobhan. Can I send this to Siobhan and some others? And I don't even know if he waited until I said yes. He'd heard, and Javon had heard it, and Javon was like, wow. And so it was like in that moment I realized, when we give something to Yahuwah, knowing that it's something maybe in the past that's held us back, but it's something that we are called to, when we give it up to him, because what does he say in Matthew 6:33? He says, seek ye first the kingdom of Yahuwah and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And what I had learned back in 2016 is My husband had quit his job and he didn't know where he was going to go, but Yahuwah had already orchestrated everything and put it into place so that the moment he walked out of that job, he walked into a better job. And he had doubted that we would be able to pay our bills with me not working, but I knew Yahuwah had told me to quit my job and to spend time with him and just to learn from him and become a full-time student of the truth. And it made me nervous too, because I was like, my husband's freaking out because it's like, we're not going to be able to pay all the bills. And I'm taking it to Yahoo. I'm like, we're not going to be able to pay all the bills, are we? But when I was faithful to do that and walk in obedience, he opened up that window of blessing. And we've not only been provided for, but we've had extra above and beyond. That we didn't have to stop taking vacations. We didn't have to stop doing all this stuff. We could still go on trips. We went on that road trip in 2017. In 2018, we went to Colorado, which was a gorgeous trip. And we went back again this year. And we've been provided for. And it's like the less money that we have now has gone further than the good money we were making when we were still in Babylon. And it was the same thing with songwriting. It was like when I gave that up, and I would get a little piece here or there, and I would record it and forget about it because that wasn't my focus anymore. I knew I needed to focus on him. And when it was time, and out of my faithfulness to know him and to see through his eyes and hear through his ears, he gave that back in his timing. And so, man, Yahuwah is faithful. And when he says something, he will do it. When he calls us to seek him first, put him first, focus on him, he's already got the provision ready. All we have to do is walk in the obedience. So this is my testimony and my experience of what he is faithful to do. He says, when you seek me, you will find me. When you seek me with all your heart. He says to seek Yahuwah while he may be found. Which means there's going to come a time where we can't find him anymore if we haven't already sought him out. He tells us to call upon his name. He tells us that there is only one name by which we may be saved. And when we call upon that name, the name of Yahuwah and his son Yahushua, he is faithful to do all that he has promised to do in our lives. Shalom. Shalom, brothers and sisters. I kind of left my testimony unwrapped up. I mean, I wrapped some things up, but I realized when I finished recording it and went back and thought about it, there were a few things that I alluded to in the beginning and probably throughout that I never actually wrapped up. So tagging the end of this testimony video, today's October 24th, 2019. And so the rest of it was recorded, I think, back in August, the end of August. So here I am wrapping it up. And I felt when I finished it that there were some things that I needed to wrap up. And then there were other things that occurred that fulfilled some things that were spoken to me that I was like, wow, these are really powerful. And I would be remiss if I didn't make sure that these were included in this testimony video. And so here we go. We're going to wrap these up. So one of the verses that I talked about was Exodus 9:16. And just a refresher, it says, "And for this reason I have raised you up, in order to show you my power, and in order to declare my name in all the earth." And I talked about how this was a verse I felt that Yahuwah had shown me early on as a young adult, just coming out of, the teenage years and whatnot. And I wanted to, that was one of the things I wanted to wrap up. And then I realized it tied into something else that he had told me. When I woke up in 2015, I was talking to my husband through the Ruach, and I told him something to the effect of 1, 2, 3, play ball. And for the longest time, I didn't understand what that meant. And so later on, actually this year, I walked outside and I was looking at my car's license plate. And I noticed something interesting that I had spoken of to a friend, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks when I saw it, because on my car, the sticker said June 2013, June 2015, June 2017, June 2019. And for those of you who have stuck with me through this entire testimony, you go, brothers and sisters. I know it's been long, but when I thought about it, I was like, there's nothing I want to leave out, just because of the magnitude of everything that Yahuwah has taken my husband and I through. And so when I thought back to that, I was like, whoa, because in 2013, if you've been following along, is when, we lost our first son. And that's also when Yahuwah gave me a promise of children. And there were some things that he showed me in June of 2013. And I was actually through my parents telling me about the story of my brother, which I won't get into because of time length. But the brief synopsis is that I have two sisters, one brother, and there's a total of 4 of us. And when my parents were pregnant with my sister, I guess I will get into it. My parents were pregnant with my sister, and Yahuwah had spoken to my dad and told him that they were going to have a son, and they were to name him Samuel. And like I said, my mom was pregnant at the time. This was not the time of routine ultrasound, so she gives birth to my sister, and of course it's a girl, and they kind of went through a time of scratching their heads like, what just happened. And so but nevertheless, 3 months later, she got pregnant and she had my brother, and they named him Samuel. And so just as Yahuwah had spoken to them, it came to pass. And I knew he was reminding me of what he had told me after we lost our son. And that's another long story, which I won't get into. But the short version is that he had given me a promise of children at that time. And so my parents telling me that was June of 2013. June of 2015 is what I have gone into in this video testimony. I've talked about how I woke up and I was prophesying when I woke up. And one of those things I was talking about was telling my husband, 1, 2, 3, play ball. And then I went into the story of kind of how I kind of fell off track. And then Yahuwah woke me up again in 2017. And that's when the whole story with my sister came about, and how I was, prompted back into action. And that's when he told me about finding the assembly. And that was May of 2017. And then in June 2017, I went on the trip that I had talked about, that I felt like he had told me that I was supposed to do. And he showed me a lot of things through that. And so then come to June 2019, and that's when I found the Mashpaha and Warriors of the Ruach. And so when I looked back on that, and I realized that when I found the mashpaha, I found the final piece that I needed in order to begin doing what he had shown me back in June 2015 that I had seen. He had shown me this picture of me beginning to share all these things that I had learned, and I was, posting on Facebook and about the things that he was showing me. Well, I didn't realize that it would be, a 4-year process of him teaching me knowledge, teaching me his name, teaching me all of these things that I had to come into to be prepared for that final piece to begin sharing. And that happened in, of course, June 2019. Shortly after that, just a couple months later, in August, is when I began, I went back to what I called my old Facebook account, which, had all my friends from, back when we were going to church and stuff like that. And I began to share at that time. And around that time, of course, my husband was also, coming into this assembly. It validated, for him that, his wife wasn't nuts, and and that there was something to this. There were other people out there. And so he began to really wake up and come into the truth as well. And one of the reasons I was really excited to share this is, just backing up a little bit, is I hadn't realized until I watched another brother's testimony. Mitch, shout out to you. I was watching his testimony. He was talking about things that happened when he came into the knowledge of the name of Yahuwah and the name of Yahushua. And I hadn't put it together yet. And this is the thing that amazes me about walking with Yahuwah is like daily, it's revelations of things he wants us to know. You don't get that in Babylon. You read a verse and, it kind of tickles your flesh and you're like, oh, that's cool. And then you move on and it doesn't really change you. Versus coming into the knowledge of Yahuwah where it truly changes you. It changed me. And I hadn't even put together all the pieces of how, and maybe I still haven't, but I have put together some. And I realized that there were a lot of things that I had dealt with up until that point that I had not overcome until I came into the knowledge of his name. One of those being the grief that we had dealt with. When I woke up in 2015, I hadn't come into the knowledge of his name, and he did take that pain away from me. But when I got confused by, the cares of the world and the things that were happening, and I let that sidetrack me, I came back under that weight of grief. And it was literally like carrying a 2-ton rock around. And at times it felt so heavy and so unbearable that there were times where I would scream at the top of my lungs. Just scream out crying, and in the pain and the grief and just wanting it to end, and almost did take my life at one point, but Yahuwah kept me from that. That's another story. And so when I came into that knowledge of his name in 2018, that vanished. And I didn't really get into this much and won't get into it a whole lot here, but when I came into the knowledge of his name, I didn't know that I was pregnant at the time. This was our fourth and the last loss that we went through. And up until that point, it had been this horrendous grieving process with all three of the first 3 boys that I carried. And what I didn't realize immediately was when I came into that knowledge, he took that grief and that weight of that pain away. And I didn't even notice it because he was showing me so much at that time that I didn't even catch it at first until later. And he had me name, he had told me a name, and I thought it was for something else, but it turned out it was for that child that I had just delivered. And he told me to name him Jamie. And when I looked up the name Jamie, I found out that it is actually a variant of the name Jacob. And when you know the story of Jacob, Jacob wrestled with Elohim. And I knew in that moment, and confirmed by a few other things that he showed me, that he was telling me to wrestle with him and to win. And that's exactly what happened, because I had come into the knowledge of his name. And when I knew his name, I was able to wrestle with him, and I was able to win. And I overcame that pain and that suffering and that 2-ton rock of grief that I had carried around for, 5 years at that point. I was able to overcome that. And he lifted that off of me. And from that point on, I kept on moving forward. And he brought me through other things I had struggled with that just fell by the wayside as I came into the knowledge of who he is. Because of what his son's name means. And that's why the name matters. The name is everything. Yahushua, who came in his Father's name. And for those who cry out to him, and I cried out so many times. And some of those times I didn't realize that he had heard me, and that he was moving, and that he was putting things together, and he was moving things out of my life that didn't belong, that I was trying to hang on to, so that he could move things into my life that were so incredible. And when I cried out to him, he gave me that knowledge and that wisdom that comes with the son's name, the Shua part, that some people want to reject, saying that's not something I want to attribute to my Savior. Well, it's not about us, people. It's about him and what he said and what he wants to give us, because he's there for those who cry out to him. And that's what he revealed to me, that in those moments when I learned his name and I cried out to him in truth, the truth of his name, he responded and he took that from me. And so these are happy tears in the realization of all that he did, because he didn't stop there. And you've already heard the story about how, he brought us into the assembly just as he had promised. But what I hadn't realized is there was a whole lot more to the story, and there was more that was going to come after I recorded the first section. So here we go. So I began sharing on Facebook, just sharing the truth. I would stalk my brothers and sisters' pages, and I would find memes, and I would just keep posting the truth. And I hadn't even connected the dots yet, that he had shown me this in 2015, that this is what he had called me to do. And why he had called me to do it, because of that verse that he had given me when I was when I was, just coming out of my teen years. And for this reason, I have raised you up for this, in order to show you my power, and in order to declare my name in all the earth. I didn't even catch that part. It didn't mean anything to me at the time. To declare my name, that's the verse that he gave me and told me that he had called me to do. And so when I began proclaiming and declaring his name, which was the key, that's when I began to realize that he was fulfilling promises that he had made to me. And that's when I realized what that 1, 2, 3 play ball meant. 2013, he was calling me the first time, just like the story of Samuel, which he coincidentally gave that name to my brother for me to know, and was revealed to me through my parents. 1, he was calling me in 2013. 2, he was calling me in 2015. And like I said, I got distracted by everything, and I got sidetracked. Again, he called me the 3rd time in 2017, and that's when I responded, and that's when he began to lead me into the truth. And then in 2019, when I was in the truth and I found the final piece, that he had also promised me, that's when I also found the last pieces that I needed to begin to publicly proclaim his name. Play ball. And when I began to play ball, just like he had told me, that's when my husband came into the truth. And that's when he fulfilled something else that he had told me. In 2015, he also told me, and this was just before I went into the hospital, he told me, return and I will heal you. And at that time, I didn't understand what he meant by that, because of course I didn't know his name. I didn't know any of these pieces. I just knew he had given me a promise, and I forgot about it until this year. And as I continued to walk into the truth, he also continued to lead me to the things that would heal my body. So, to try to make a long story short, when we lost our son in 2013, up until that point, I had struggled with allergies for most of my life. When I came into the knowledge of using food to heal our bodies, my allergies actually had cleared up at that point. And then when we lost our son, it triggered a bad asthmatic breathing reaction in me that I've struggled with for the past 6 years. So I was daily on inhalers just to breathe, and actually ended up in the ER twice in 2015 because I could not breathe, and wound up in the ER. So when I ended up in the hospital, when all that stuff was happening, I had been to the ER prior to that. And then a couple months after that happened, I actually ended up in the ER again. And so it was pretty bad, pretty serious. And so at that time, it was bad enough that the doctor had prescribed prednisone for me. And so I was taking that intermittently as needed. And so in this year, 2019, 6 years after our son had passed, it was like the script started flipping. I started having allergy problems again, which I hadn't struggled with over the past 6 years. But it came back as the breathing problems were actually beginning to lessen, but I was still struggling with them. And when Yahuwah brought me into the knowledge of how foods can heal, and also to realize a lot of the things going on with our food supply, and a lot of things that we shouldn't be eating that we may be tricked into thinking are healthier for us, but really are not. When I began to get rid of those foods and began to add in other things that he had shown me that could be used for healing, my body began to heal, including one of those being goat milk, which is talked about in Proverbs 27:27. I might mention that before, but it actually was part of what has been my healing process. And when I realized that he had given me 4 specific promises, and that 3 of those had been fulfilled. The first promise was the promise of children. The second promise was he told me, return and I will heal you, which we actually find in the scripture in at least 2 different versions that I've looked up, where he said return. And actually let's go to one of those. Really quick here. Sorry, I should have looked this up ahead of time. But I did not know I'd be using this one. Okay, so the verse is Malachi 4:2, 4 verse 2. And it says, "But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and leap for joy like calves from the stall." And I had heard that verse, I think the first time I remember actually hearing that verse was a woman who I knew in Babylon who was, she had gone through cancer 4 times before it finally took her from this earth. And she would quote that verse, and I could be wrong, but I'm almost positive she never quoted the first part of that verse. She just would say, she would just quote the part, "The Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings." And I remember Yahuwah showing me that she wasn't healed because she wouldn't answer his call. And of course, at that time, I didn't know what that meant, because this was back in 2016. I didn't know what that meant. And so I just recently reread that verse as I was being healed, and I'm amazed by it. And I'm going, and I saw that verse somewhere, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I need to reread that. "But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings." And I was like, it blew my mind, because it was like, now that I know his name, that's what he meant by "return to me, and I will heal you." Return to me. And at the beginning of this month of October 2019, I stopped struggling with the allergies. I stopped struggling with the asthma I had been plagued with for 6 years. I had, this has started a while ago, but I stopped having the migraines that I had been plagued with my entire life. I no longer have them anymore. And I'm off all of my medications except for one. He told me, "Return and I will heal you." In 2015, he told me that my husband is slow but worth waiting for. And at the time, my husband thought it was an insult, that it meant he was stupid, and he was offended by it at that time. I didn't entirely know what it meant myself until this year, when I realized it meant that he's slow to come into the truth, but he's worth waiting for, because Yahuwah had shown us little snapshots of when my husband would start to respond, and when he did, when we would work together to share the truth, we are powerful in it and can't be stopped. And when he woke up this year, that promise came back to me. He's slow, so he took a little bit longer than I did to wake up, but he's worth waiting for. And that's when I realized that he had fulfilled all of those things, except for one that's still coming. He had fulfilled them all in reverse, because he told me that he would give us children, that when I return, he would heal me, that my husband was slow but worth waiting for, and then the last promise was that I would find an assembly. So we found the assembly. My husband came into the truth. I'm being healed as we speak, and have been off of all allergy and asthma medications and migraine medications for almost a month, which just leaves one more promise. When I realized that, I had no words. I was floored. And I told Javon, I said, wait a minute. Don't put the testimony video out yet because I have to add this on. And I knew why I felt like it wasn't finished, even though I didn't know all the pieces at the time. Because when I walked into what he had called me to do, he fulfilled his promises to me. He kept his promises. Because he says, I am not a man that I should lie, nor son of man that I should change my mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? He also says in Hebrews that the one who calls us is faithful and that he will do it. All that he's promised. And so for those of my brothers and sisters who are listening to this, yeah, we know it's hard. And it can be a little bit lonely sometimes, standing on the truth when it looks like nobody else is standing with you. But we know we're never alone because Yahuwah of hosts is standing with us. And he says, and he promises that his esteem will be our rear guard. And just like the story of Eliyahu, aka Elijah, on Mount Carmel, and after he had defeated the prophets of Baal, and he's feeling discouraged because Jezebel's seeking him to kill him, and Yahuwah reminds him that there's 7,000 called by me who haven't bowed a knee to Baal. We're out there. And none of you is ever alone. Even though the enemy works overtime to try to get us to believe that. And I fell for it. I fell for it a couple times on my way to opening my eyes and realizing the truth. I fell for that one. And so Yahuwah would bring people into my life to walk along with me. A shout out to my friend Jen, who Yahuwah put her in my path and I didn't know why. And she woke up around the same time I did. And I was able to speak truth to her. And we were able to walk together into this truth. And he gave me someone to walk alongside until my husband came into it. And we found the assembly. Because that's who he is. You know, we served this false deity back in Babylon who, you know, it was like winning the lottery to see your prayers answered. And the truth is, when we came into the knowledge of who Yahuwah is, he does answer our prayers. Because he says, the fervent, effectual prayers of a righteous man availeth much. Because he cares, he knows. He knows those he's chosen before the foundations of the world. And he moves heaven and earth to get us to where we need to be. And so, this concludes my testimony. I hope it's brought those of you out here who stuck this long. And know that for those of you who may be standing on some promises that have not been fulfilled yet, he is faithful. And just like he promised Abraham and Sarah, just like he promised Isaac and Rebekah, just like he promised Jacob, just like he promised so many people, Joseph in the Bible, all of those, and what they saw, what he told them was fulfilled. And he states he does not change. That he, Yahuwah, does not change. If he made promises back then and fulfilled them, he makes promises today still, and he still fulfills them. When we return to him. And that's all I have for you guys. And I hope it's brought you greatly. And all praise to my Father, Abba Yahuwah, through his Son, Yahushua HaMashiach. Aman and Salah.